This video is about the formation of a warm front. So you can see here, we're going to draw a diagram and add some labels to it to show how one of these forms in a low pressure system. So the weather that's brought by a warm front is it tends to bring bands of cloud, which start off with drizzly rain, then sort of gets heavier to become more steady, sort of continuous rain. You'll see why that is as we sort of go through this video. So here is an important thing to mention. This is the ground. So we'll be looking at our front in cross sections. What that means is if you were to slice into it and look at a side view, this is what it would look like. So over here we have a warm air mass. So for example, we might have something like a tropical maritime air mass. So we'll have that over here. So a warm air mass, this happens to be a wet one, but it doesn't need to be, but something warm. And then over here we have a cold air mass. So example, a polar maritime. Now, these air masses have different temperatures, okay? So warm air mass, cold air mass. And what happens is when these two air masses meet, they don't mix. So they have different densities, different properties, and therefore they don't mix together, but they have a strict boundary between them, which is called our front. So what happens as this warm air moves towards the cold air, it tends to rise up. Now this is sort of simple science that we've done before, sort of simple physics, that warm air rises. So warm air is less dense than cold air, so the warm air is then able to rise. So the warm air is rising here. Just like we did before with low pressure systems, the warm air is rising up. Now when that warm air rises, again, as we know, a couple of things happen. So we get cooling, we get condensation, and we get clouds forming. So we get cooling of that air as it gets higher up in the atmosphere. This causes condensation as it's cooled down. And as we know, when we get condensation, we get clouds. So as this warm air is rising up, we end up with a big cloud sort of forming here. And this boundary between this warm air and this cold air is our front. And a warm front tends to be at an angle like this. Okay, so this line here I've just drawn is our front, and I'm going to draw on some little semicircles here. I'll explain why in a moment, but these semicircles basically represent our warm front. So the warm air is rising up here, and we've got cooling, condensation, and clouds. So this is going to form clouds here, and even higher clouds up here. So these are high clouds up in the sky, and these other clouds, they tend to be much bigger, tend to form a layer, which is something called a nimbostratus cloud. Now you don't really need to know those names, but it's quite handy to sort of have. So nimbostratus clouds, these ones are much, much bigger. So here, at this point in the front, you tend to get a little bit of drizzle. So we only really tend to get sort of drizzle from high clouds like this, whereas when we have these big nimbostratus clouds, that's when we get sort of more proper continuous rainfall. Whereas here, we tend to only get sort of drizzle. Now this whole front is able to move. So this warm air is coming in like this towards the cold air, and this whole front is able to move across the surface, and it moves in this direction. So if you have a place that is here, so this is where you're standing. This could be like a town or a city or your house. This whole front is able to move across that town or city. So initially, when this front comes in, you might experience a little bit of drizzle from these high clouds that are over the town. Then as it moves in, you'll get some much bigger clouds called nimbostratus with lots and lots of rain over the town. And then as this passes over, you'll get through to some of the drier weather. Now the reason this is called a warm front is because the air here is cold. So remember, all this air in this triangle is cold. So this here is cold air still. So all of this is cold, all the way over here as well. But this air is warm. and all of this sort of parcel of air is warm. So when this point passes over, this warm front passes over a place, it's going to bring warm temperatures. So we go from very cold temperatures to warmer temperatures. And that's why it's called a warm front, because it's in front of the warm air. So this place here, if we think of our town again, is currently in cold air, so it's above this town, and then cold air, cold air, cold air, warm front passes over, and it's then got an increase in temperature because it's now got the warm air mass. So if you imagine this in sort of 3D, if this is your town, this would be sticking up into the air. So you would have the cold air and the rain, the warm front passing over, and then the warmer air with no rain.